Okay, class, in this lesson, we're going to look at changing fractions to decimals to percents. But this one's going to be the short lesson. Okay? So what we're going to look at today is how do I change a decimal to a percent? Well, what you need to remember is all you have to do is move the decimal to the right 2 places. Let's see if we can do a couple of questions like that. So in 0.25, we need to change 0.25 to a percent. As this says up here, you just move the decimal 2 places to the right. So we're going to move this decimal 2 places to the right. 0.25 becomes 25%. 0.02, move it 2 places to the right, becomes 2%. 1.6, anytime you have a whole number, you're going to end up with a percentage greater than 100. So we take this decimal, we move it over 2 places to the right. If we have an empty place, we do add a 0. So this becomes 160%. And yes, you can have percentages greater than 100. Okay, and this last one, we've got 0.0035. We do what this says, move the decimal 2 places to the right, and we end up with 0.35%, a percent that is smaller than 1. Yes, you can have percentages greater than 100% and less than 1%. Well, what if I wanted to go the other direction, changing a percent to a decimal? Well, in order to do that, you move the decimal to the left 2 places and take off the percent sign. Okay, so let's look at these right here. We've got 45%. Well, the first thing you need to realize about this one is there is no decimal. So in a whole number, the decimal will always be found at the end. Okay, so to change this percentage to a decimal, you move the decimal 2 places to the left, and you end up with just 0.45. We need to remember that 45% does not mean 1. Right? Okay, it is, in this case, less than half of whatever it happens to be. 1.5%. You may say, but Mr. Nash, there's already a decimal. I don't need to change it. As long as there is a percent sign on it, this decimal number is still a percentage. It is not a decimal number until you move the decimal to the left 2 places. And again, if you have any empties, you add a 0. So 0.15% becomes 0.015 as a decimal. 325%, well, anything above 100, you know you're going to have a whole number in there. So again, it doesn't have a decimal, so we know it's at the end. I move the decimal 2 places to the left, and we end up with 3.25. 0.025%, same thing. We move the decimal 2 places to the left. I have an empty, so I add another 0, and this one becomes 0.00025. So to change a decimal to a percent, you just move the decimal 2 places to the right and add a percent sign. To change a percent to a decimal, you move the decimal 2 places to the left and take off the percent sign. So in our lesson today, we're actually going from fractions to decimals to percents. So let's see if we can do a few examples that will be like what you will have on your assignment. So I need to change a fraction to a decimal and then to the percent. So the fraction that we have is 3/5. Well, if you remember, to change a fraction to a decimal, you simply divide top and bottom out. 3/5 is one of those fractions to decimals that you have to have memorized. So 3/5 is 0.6. Okay? To change this decimal to a percent, you just move the decimal 2 places to the right, and you end up with 60%. Okay? Please do not move the decimal on the answer. Make sure you do it in another spot. Okay? 4.6. Okay, so we've got 4.6. So to change that to a percentage, I move the decimal 2 places to the right, add a percent sign, so this becomes 460%. So again, we had a whole number, so we had a percentage greater than 100. Okay, and 4.6, we say that is 4 6/10. So we write that as 4 6/10, and that simplifies to 4 3/5, just like we had the 3/5 up here. 72%, we find the decimal, we move the decimal 2 places to the left. This becomes 0.72, which will then give me as a fraction 72 hundredths, or 72 out of 100, which is what the percentage means. So 72 over 100. and then we simplify that. We divide them both by 2 first, because that's what I see that I can divide them by. I end up with 36 over 50. I can still divide by 2, and I end up with 18 over 25. So let's look at a couple that are a little bit more difficult. Okay, some that may have some repeating digits in it. So 2/3, okay, again, it's on our list of ones to memorize. And if we do 2 divided by 3, we find out we get 0.6 with a bar, because that 6 just continues. And the way we write a repeating decimal is the digit that repeats one time, and then we put a bar on it. Now to change this one to a percentage, what I like to do is write this a little further out past the bar, so we know what's going on. So when I move this decimal over 2 places, I know that the whole part of this percentage is going to be 66. Well, the one rule that we have in percentages is you can't write a repeating decimal in a percent. So we have to change the repeating decimal part into its corresponding fraction. So we look at this part that's past the decimal. And what fraction will give me the 0.666666666? Well, we know that from this one is 2/3. So this becomes 66 2/3%. 0.125, well, if we change that into a fraction, I just say it correctly, and we end up with 125 over 1,000. And this is another one of those that is on our memorization list, so we know that 0.125 will give us 1/8. And then to change this one into a percentage, okay, 0.125, we move our decimal 2 places to the right. We end up with 12.5%. Now this decimal is perfectly fine to have because it's a terminating decimal. The only kind that you can't have are the repeating decimals, and you must change them back to their corresponding fraction. Now our last one, 45 5/11. With this one we've got a fraction, so I need to find the decimal, so I have to change this fraction to a decimal. And more than likely the reason why is it's a repeating decimal. That's why it's in the form of a fraction. And yes, it is 5/11 will give me 0.45 with a bar. But right now this is not a decimal yet. I have to move that decimal over 2 places to the left in order for that to be a decimal. Now where does that 45 really start repeating? With the very first one that we have. So this becomes 0.45 with a bar, and then the 0.45 with a bar actually will give me 45 over 99, because I put a 9 for each repeating digit, and this will then simplify down to 5/11. So let's do a review just to finish this up. To change a fraction to a decimal, simply do top in, bottom out, and you divide. To change a decimal to a fraction, well, if it's a terminating decimal, you just say it using place value. A repeating decimal, you put a 9 for each number that repeats in the denominator. To change a decimal to a percent, you move the decimal 2 places to the right and add a percent sign. To change a percent to a decimal, you move the decimal 2 places to the left, or move the decimal to the left 2 places and take away the percent sign. Okay, so that's how you change fractions to decimals and then to percents and back again.